Welcome to the Research for Social Change Lab podcast. For our first series, we will be presenting panel talks and conversations from our symposium on housing and homelessness in Peterborough. Addressing homelessness not only requires support for people who are already unhoused, but it entails lowering the risk of people shifting into increasingly precarious housing situations. The first speakers of this second panel represent the Finding Home collaboration for addressing housing unit takeovers, comprised of the CMHA, One City, and the Housing Resource Centre. They are followed by a discussion of community mediation by Marion Little. And finally, Brittany MacMillan, the Executive Director of the Kawartha Sexual Assault Centre, demonstrates why addressing gender-based violence is a strategy for homeless prevention. All three presentations illuminate the value of preventative and restorative approaches to crisis through, for example, simultaneously tenants and their unwelcome guests sorting out neighbour conflicts before they escalate and teaching boys how to be allies. They all show respectful, upstream approaches that reduce both harm and the need for more reactive, authoritarian, downstream, and law enforcement interventions. Importantly, all show the necessity for continued funding so that these gains are not lost.
Welcome everyone to the Decriminalising / Destigmatizing Approaches to Vulnerable / Unstable Tenancies panel. I'm Sage and I'll be moderating today. I'm the project lead of A Question of Care with the Peterborough Drug Strategy. So we have the following presentations lined up today as outlined in the program, and those are HUTS and the Playbook for Community Collaboration, and that is with Melissa, Natasha, and Alana. Then we have Community Mediation, Increasing Empowerment, Safety, Belonging, and Housing Retention with Marion Little. And Housing and Homelessness, Challenges Survivors Face with Brittany MacMillan. And before we get started with the presentations, we're just going to go through and do some introductions. So I'm just going to start for this break here. So I'll start with Marion Little, community mediator. So Marion's preferred pronouns are she, her. She's devoted her career to fostering safe sanctuary for individuals and relationships within community and across institutional structures. As a past executive director, Marion's been part of teams that stabilized small BC charities addressing youth homelessness, affordable childcare, and peer-to-peer supports for sex workers. She's also a seasoned community mediator, circle facilitator, and trainer specializing in nonviolent communication, transformative mediation, restorative justice processes, violence prevention, and collaborative leadership. Marion's work at John Howard Peterborough has worked at John Howard Peterborough since 2015. First, launching Community Mediation Peterborough, then managing educational services for a few years, and recently shifting back to her favorite frontline work in high schools. Private consulting keeps her busy too. Sadly, John Howard closed Community Mediation Peterborough in September after keeping it alive for 6 years with no funding. Marion's here today as an individual community member reporting back to us on that program. And now I'm just going to hand it over to Brittany.
I didn't send in my bio. I'm Brittany MacMillan, and I'll stand just because I can see people trying to inch their way up. Go ahead, welcome. I'm the Executive Director at Kawartha Sexual Assault Centre, also known as KSAC. Before my time over at KSAC, I worked for Canopy Support Services for frontline, working with folks with developmental disabilities or developmental delays for 15 years. And then as part of my own healing journey as a survivor of sexual violence, I was ready to come back or want to work within the field of sexual violence. So was pretty happy when, things aligned, and I was able to apply for the executive director position there. So I've been with KSAC for almost 3 years now, and love the work that the team does there, and am super passionate about bringing to light the issues around gender-based violence and sexual violence. Just recently took part with the Peterborough Domestic Abuse Network in having our city and our county declare intimate partner violence an epidemic in our community. So huge for our continued fight to end gender-based violence. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Elena Parisian. I work for One City Peterborough. I'm the outreach coordinator there. I've worked in housing and homelessness for about 4 years. That's about all I want to share.
Love it. I'm Melissa. I currently work with CMHA HKPR. I just super quick. I've been blessed to have opportunity in various different roles within our sector, and today I am here to present on our Housing Unit Takeover program that we've been working on in the community.
I'm Natasha. I work at CCRC and I'm part of the collaboration in the Finding Home program. And at CCRC, I'm a housing counselor / housing retention worker.
So thanks so much. So we'll begin with our first presentation on HUTs and the playbook for community collaboration, and then have a short Q&A after. So just so folks know, each presentation will be 20 minutes, followed by about 8 for questions. But before we get started, do folks have any general questions about today's panel? Okay, great. So I will then hand things over to Melissa, Natasha, and Alana.
We are presenting on Housing Unit Takeovers. Very quickly, it is a pilot project currently in the city. We are almost at our end date at the end of March. It has been funded thus far through United Way. And one of our key features is that it is a 100% collaboration between One City, CCRC, do you need this? And CMHA. Are those you got all the main things?
Oh,
Yep.
yes. Sorry.
Gorgeous. No, you're doing great. You're on cue. So I mentioned one of the key pieces was the collaboration to this project, and what has worked really well is giving us the opportunity in the community to pull multiple different resources all at the same time. So we're not, or I shouldn't say we're not, but we're less susceptible to wait lists and having to research ideas or concepts or support and resources. Between the three of us have been able to build at least a small or well-supported wraparound connection for individuals in the community. And one of the other pieces to highlight around our program was that the intention of, I'm struggling with one of the key intentions was to be able to support both a tenant and guest or guests within a unit takeover. So, that's the obnoxious one, so we wanted to. So if you're kind of wondering to yourself, what is a unit takeover? One of the things that we quickly highlighted in community was that a lot of us have heard about the hostile unit takeovers. Those are the big scary ones that you hear in the media, often revolve around police intervention. It's where you would hear more about there being threats, violence, people are fearful to even return to their own home, let alone be in their own home or unit space. What our program has had more connections with is what we have termed a housing unit takeover. So individuals who often have initially invited and wanted a guest in their unit, and that guest has very much started to overstay their welcome. So the initial point is they're connected through previous kinship, so like friend, family, whether street, community, or natural family. And that together they're servicing an unmet need or needs for one another. That then kind of can turn into it presenting a risk or impacts to tenancy, or the tenant themselves are you taking a picture of me? Just, just is no longer feeling comfortable with that guest in their unit. So one of the little manuals that we presented, I guess I should sort of talk a bit about this. The manuals that you have in front of you are supposed to be a quick snapshot of what we've learned and experienced, give you some of the risk factors, the cues to look for when you're connecting with individuals in the community. And I'm just going to go over a quick, the differences between a hostile and housing unit takeover. And then it lays out a really quick kind of, map out for how to support and intervene in a housing unit takeover. So some of the things, if you're supporting individuals in housing, in the community in general, some of the things you're going to look for a housing unit takeover, typically, again, and this is from our experience and what we've encountered in our community specifically, there's fewer guests involved. The tenant was initially willing and invited the guest into the unit. The tenant knows the guests. That were some of the other key pieces, sorry. I think we kind of spoke to all of those. So there's a full list in the book. Oh, sorry, on page 6. I was supposed to. Oh, it's up there. Okay. Good. The hostile unit takeover, like we kind of spoke about, there's typically more guests involved. The tenant would feel coerced or forced into having those individuals in their space. Threats of violence, criminalized behavior. And again, they're not absolute. They're just more often what we see and experience with individuals. And just on page 3, we kind of captured kind of when or why would you involve police. So again, the primary source of our connections are more what we would coin as a housing unit takeover. So less police involvement, that is often an area, it's a barrier, it's an area of stigma, it's an area of trauma for a lot of our participants. So we never lead with that, but we would certainly support any individual who wanted to involve police. We have had the opportunity to connect with individuals who have experienced hostile unit takeover, and once police have either the individual has relinquished their unit on their own choosing, and or police have been involved, and we're Christian, are supporting individuals in aftercare and post-care to search for new housing and kind of resume that sense of safety and security in the community. What do we got next? Okay, so our hope and objective in providing you with these manuals was to give you a bit of a walkthrough on how to support someone who's experiencing a unit takeover. Do y'all have any questions before we just, yeah?
I was looking at the card, my question is, if you know someone that this could be happening to, is there a way you can alert somebody that maybe because they don't want to say that they might be in trouble, but you know that they are? Does that make sense?
Yeah, so step 1 of our intervention is meeting with the individual alone. Does that make sense?
Yeah, if you have a neighbor that this could be happening to, but you know your neighbor's not going to do anything about it.
Speak up themselves.
How can you kind of go about that by kind of standing up for them and kind of being that advocate? Are you able to come to you or anybody else on the panel to kind of get information on that?
Yeah, 100%. That's a really great question. So we will, as far as our program has been operating, we will accept referrals from anywhere, anyone. So if you're able to share that, ideally when the individual tenant knows of it, it makes it easier and less kind of confusing for them. But we will certainly respond to any individual referral that comes to us. And obviously we're having conversations with tenants, sharing about what the program looks like, how we operate, what supports we can provide, and they're free to say no thanks, or and sometimes it's just about letting them know that we're here and we exist, and that there are people in the community that are concerned about you, and they might not be agreeable. Are you coming in? they might not be agreeable in the moment, but that will help to prompt them to know that there are resources available when they do feel ready.
Yeah, I'm only thinking just because some people might not see it as that kind of situation if they're living in it, but from the outside you might see it as like, this isn't the best situation right here. So just kind of looking for some input.
Yeah, so our biggest piece and step one is removing the individual from the actual unit and from the guests themselves, and being able to have a conversation around, hey, either we and or someone else are concerned about the situation. These are the things that we see. Let's talk more about that. Do you feel, is there something that you're doing that you don't really want to be doing? Is there something that you're doing because you feel you have no other choice in the situation? And then just, again, opening or creating an open space for dialogue. And then, sorry guys, eating dinner and then, or eating lunch, talking right after is not so great. Thank you. No, thank you. But thank you very much. So yeah, I think so in those conversations, also talking about kind of a sense of safety, what alternative supports and resources they have already connected to them, and then what it is that we're able to support and offer. Is that enough on one, do you think? So another piece that we learned in step 2 for an intervention, and again, this is if we're supporting alongside you, or again, our hope and goal is to kind of build that capacity within all of us in the community to be able to support all of our tenants when you have connections in various different roles with housing support and resources. So step 2 is establishing legal rights to a unit. So there's different types of tenancies. We heard very briefly earlier about kind of occupancy agreements versus transitional agreements versus real leases, verbal leases. So understanding, if you can, ideally having a copy of the actual lease to understand who is a named tenant and who isn't. And then we've learned different things about whether someone is a roommate, considered a roommate, a subletter, a spouse, or relative. And there's different kind of rules and processes that apply to each of those circumstances. So you want to understand that before you start creating an intervention plan. And So building the intervention plan itself, it is done entirely alongside the tenant. One of our biggest things that we identify is that they are free and willing to push pause and or tell us to stop at any point in time when they feel we can redirect the path, or if they want to just stop completely if something feels not right or not comfortable, and or in some instances they feel comfortable to just resolve the situation themselves. They just needed to know and understand what they were experiencing, and they're able to process it further, and that often helps to maintain the relationship that they've already had with the individual. So for us, as supports in the community, we are often turning our minds to safety plans. We want to mitigate risk for both the tenant, guest, as well as our team when we are responding. And when we are actually supporting with a direct intervention, one of the key pieces is making sure that the tenant themselves is not in the unit or not in the space. Again, drawing on that there was a relationship previously and or still, and we want to be able to come in and have clear and direct conversations with the guest, and not, I guess, sort of try to preserve that dynamic in their relationship as much as possible.
Sorry, I have a question.
Yeah.
What does that look like? Do you have a support worker that then would take that person for coffee, or take them to a safe place, or are you just this is when it's going to happen? Can we just ask that you're not around? What does that?
All of those things. Yeah, and so, I mean, one of the opportunities that we have had in our pilot project is to be able to access motel stays when it's something, it's maybe a little bit more convoluted, and also more so in the beginning when we were learning kind of what the responses and reactions were in different situations and how to navigate these things, or navigate all the different I guess, circumstance that we were confronted with. So having the actual tenant stay in a motel for a couple of nights, they're in a safe, comfortable space. They, you know, still have a roof over their head. We still make sure that they have access to clinics, pharmacies, other supports that they're currently connected with. And then we're able to attend and address the guests themselves in the actual unit. So the relocation of the guest in particular, one of the biggest excitements for our program was the goal of being able to house a guest. Because if they're hanging out in someone else's unit, likely that they don't have housing themselves. That became increasingly difficult with stock in our community. So we really, that's where I think the collaboration became so highlighted in the community. So not only did we leverage our own resources, so I mean, when we're doing housing searches, Housing Resource Center has, you know, all the tools and capacity there. One City understands what it looks like and feels like to live rough. They have survival gear. They are on it with harm reduction supplies. And then CMHA brought in the case management and just kind of understanding what applications, what assessment tools, that type of thing needed to be in place in order to start to navigate different community applications, referrals, and that type of thing. So some of the things that we learned is needing to be very clear, direct, and prompt with a guest. So if they say, oh yeah, that's cool, like I'll totally meet with you, come back tomorrow, that's not gonna happen. So when you do connect with them, it's about being ready and prepared in the moment to understand they might, and do as much as you can in the moment. They might need to go to social services, be prepared to walk with them. They might say like, yeah, I need housing, I need help, I need support in that. And we need to go to the Housing Resource Center. We need to introduce them to that space in the moment as much as possible. Sometimes it's just, we had one family who were like, yeah, I came here from out of town 2 weeks ago and my ride just left me here, so I'm here. So how do we support them just getting back to their own space? And I put the written piece up there because what we did encounter was the guests were like, whatever, I don't care, da-da-da-da-da, see you later. I don't want to engage, I don't care who you are, get lost. And then we would start to hear through other people, oh, I think someone talked to you the other day and they actually want to still meet with you. And or One City was picking them up to be like, did you meet with someone like up the road and they had this, and this? Because they said they were supposed to meet with you, but now they don't know. So having something in writing to hand to them to be like, hey, you can't be here, sorry, that sucks. And we want to help you to navigate whatever resources, supports, and pieces that you're looking for, that you're missing, and that we can possibly introduce you to. So to have that like, hey, we're here at these times, please come. Yeah.
Are there restrictions based on communication between the guest and the individual whose unit it is? So afterwards?
We don't unless they ask, we wouldn't place those conditions. Certainly if it comes into a circumstance where the tenant and or I think in a couple instances the landlord had pushed towards a no trespass. For us, it's about, when it comes from the landlord, we've had very transparent conversations with tenants around what that looks like, what that means, and how it's going to feel for them. And sometimes the landlord will agree to do it to the building versus the unit kind of thing, so that it takes as much away from the tenant as possible. But as far as communication, like, we're certainly not imposing any of those suggestions. I mean, if that's part of the safety plan, we're gonna, implore the tenant to have barriers and what that looks like and how they can mitigate their own safety and circumstance if that's what they feel they need and want. But as far as like creating that as part of the process, no. Okay. Welcome. Is there any pieces that you want to add, or that
Great.
Alrighty, and so one of our last key piece around an intervention is facilitating a lock change for the unit, and if really necessary, the building as well. That just kind of helps to, if there's any question or belief or certainty that a guest has a copy of a key or just has the key in general, that just helps to kind of reset the tenancy for the tenant themselves, that this is your space. There's a sense of safety and security back on the unit, and you can start to resume where you had started off from.
Do you often have people return to units that where the locks were changed?
The same individual?
Yeah.
Or different people?
Same
It happens. Yep.
And how does that go for the tenant?
I mean, we just reset the cycle.
Okay.
So and that's the thing, because they are often an invited guest in the first place. Again, that's kind of our connection that we've made. It's our support is 99% not police involved, not police intervention. So there is that prior relationship with the tenant and the guest. So we know that that's going to happen. And what we ran into was needing to and wanting to support guests to be able to be housed themselves, and that's a process. And so they are left, we're supporting them to navigate the sheltering system. That's not a safe or healthy space for a lot of individuals. And so, the alternative is tenting, and or do they start couch surfing, and we're just doing our best to help them through that. So yes, there are instances where they return because that is a familiar space, it's a comfortable space for them, and that's where they go. So we're just, in some instances it works out for us because we're like, hey, we haven't seen you in a while. How's it going? We missed you. What else do you need? How else can we support? Where did we miss the last time? So we can kind of pick back up there. So it kind of works out a little bit, and just, it's kind of just part of the process. It is the reality. I think that's a good point. It's not always or often what happens, but it definitely happens. And there are tenants who, for a variety of reasons, will experience a unit takeover a few different times, whether it's with the same guest or a different guest. And that's just about kind of a learning process for them around their personal, kind of imploring their personal space and their boundaries.
Question.
Yes.
I wanted to say just
Oh, seriously? We actually talked that long? Go team!
you talked that long.
Sorry. Okay.
Who do you call? Who do you call?
So any one of our agencies, and there is for a specific referral for our program. I think, is it in here? I'm sure it's in here, right?
It wasn't there.
Our
If I had
referral?
my
No.
individual, I didn't know who
Oh, I
to
guess
call,
it didn't.
and he didn't want to call the police.
Oh. Yeah. So any one of our agencies would be able to get you started. For our program specifically, we had a referral process through an email. So it's just finding home at cmhahkpr.ca, because that's super easy to remember. It's the only piece, though, is that we are funded through the end of March. So I don't think it's in there because we want this for community partners to be able to have and refer to when, when we're not here, you have some kind of key points to be able to work from yourselves and move forward in supporting your individuals. But definitely, if you call One City, CCRC, or CMHA, they will put you through to us, and we will talk you through the
So
situation.
they don't have to phone the police. Yeah. Because the guy didn't want it, right?
Yeah, absolutely. For so many reasons that we completely appreciate and understand, right?
So One City, is it?
Yep.
One City, CCRC, or CMHA.
Community Council, CCRC's Community Council.
Hi. What are some legal resources? Because my experience with friends that have had hostile unit takeovers is that by the time it becomes exposed, the landlords have used it to justify kicking them out. So people who have been living on social assistance for decades have been put on the street, and their assistance is now not enough to cover them. And the tipping point was the hostile unit takeover. So is there any legal support?
Because the accusations of the hostile unit takeover are placed on the tenant, and so the court process is on them and their testimony and everything. So the legal resources, there is Peterborough Legal Center. They have actually been quite helpful for us to kind of, when we've just sort of pulled them aside to be like, look at, here's a general scenario, hypothetical scenario, like tell us what to do. What can't we do in these situations? So they are actually good for that. And we have, because specific situation and circumstance, we were connecting with the Family Law Information Center, and then just victim services through each of the police, depending on, like, yeah, if there's a hostile and there's police involvement, kind of outside of them or alongside of them. Other than that, no. There's nothing specific to be able to support.
I guess what I was trying to ask, which is like how do people that have experienced hostile unit takeovers not navigate the harm from the takeover, but navigate their circumstances from the takeover with their landlord.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I'm trying to say.
The eviction repercussion type of piece.
So we can help with that. That's something that we do. We support mediation between the landlord and the tenant. If it's possible to reserve the tenancy, then we'll support them in doing that. Sometimes it's not possible because the damage has been done, and then we have to support them through moving into homelessness, moving into a unit, whatever that might look like. But that's something that we would support with.
When our program is potentially finished at the end of March too, that's also something that CCRC in general does. So referring them to a housing counselor at CCRC would hopefully be able to help the person's situation.
Yeah, if I can jump in, I think that if it's a landlord and tenant, if you're asking about landlord and tenant repercussions, I think the Housing Resource Center is the first place to contact, and then the staff there can figure out whether it's something that eviction prevention worker can deal with, or whether it's something you'd be better off going to the Peterborough Community Legal Center for. But I think that the Housing Resource Center is the first place to call and let the staff there sort of dig into the issue and figure out where the next step is.
Jen, good?
Yeah.
Comments? Concerns? Thank you for your time and my team.
So I'll hand things over to Marion for community mediation, increasing empowerment, safety, belonging, and housing retention.
Okay, thanks, Sage. So I'm here as a community member today. The program that I was involved in, Community Mediation Peterborough, has been housed through the John Howard Society Peterborough since 2015 and is on pause. So we're trying not to say closed, but there hasn't been a press release, so you and my closest friends know, closest colleagues, that this is the case. We're just in the middle of executive transition at John Howard Society, so a press release hasn't gone out yet around this. So I'm going to share a report with you that was shared with the city and with our volunteers. So it's a report that's out there that summarizes kind of our numbers over the 6-7 years that we were rolling along off the sides of people's desks. And it was really exciting to see what was happening. I think there's an incredible amount of potential. I was so actually struck and moved by the restorative approach that you're taking to responding to housing takeovers. Like, I think that that's really, really powerful to not demonize people who are also struggling with homelessness and who are trying to meet their needs at the expense of somebody who's precariously housed or, you know, something like that. And that when I hear you talking about force and putting things into place, like, oh, you know, you can't be here, whatever, that you're doing that in a way that's very protective and that takes into account the needs of the person who's, you know, being asked to step out of a place where they're no longer invited. And I think that it's a really good example of sort of the spectrum of responses and interventions we could be looking at around these kinds of things. So before it becomes a hostile takeover and before it becomes even like a housing takeover where a friend is couch surfing for too long, I think there's an opportunity for community mediation to support folks who are housemates. So community mediation didn't support domestic violence situations. That's sort of beyond the scope of that program. But neighbors who are sharing a house, that would fit. people who are new to being tenants, so young adults who are new to being a neighbor, new to being a tenant, often don't realize about sound at night or smoking in the building or things like that, and can end up in quite intense conflict that makes their housing precarious, and it doesn't need to be. So so community mediation is a really exciting program. I have a handout for you, and I actually just last night found a report that was just released in January. It's like a 3-year overview of the impact of community mediation in the state of Massachusetts, looking at mediation services across all the counties in that entire state. And there's some really exciting information coming out about the potential for community mediation to both save money in municipalities and policing, and also to save a lot of distress in the community and retain housing, stability and things like that. So I don't like PowerPoint at all, but I've used this to try and corral myself a little bit. So, and I'm totally time blind, so I don't even know what just happened in terms of time. Just gather myself here. Yeah, I know. Don't tell me that, Sage. Okay, just let the pressure keep me on point. So so basically with community mediation, what we're trying to do is to take similar kinds of restorative approaches and apply them to interpersonal situations and support people to have those conversations that aren't police matters, but when things escalate, people are like, this is too big for us. Who do we call next? And it's really municipal hall or the the police. And then the police show up and they're like, this isn't a police matter, sort yourselves out. But now everybody's angrier because police were called. And so somebody said, well, I'm going to call police on you. You call police on me. So now police are coming out multiple times to a situation that's still not a police matter, but escalating in a dangerous way. And we've seen situations between seniors, who look very benign and like frail and not going to hurt anybody, who are calling police on each other to the point that they're slashing each other's tires and putting, ketchup under the handles of things on people's houses. And so now it's starting to become a police matter. And that's really scary for people who are like, maybe have never even really interacted with police before. So suddenly that becomes a really scary situation for them that they don't know how to navigate. So who do we call? No, not Ghostbusters. So we want to call somebody who can come out, who's not so official and not so scary, somebody who's from the community. And so community mediators, one of the beauties of community mediation is that we look at conflict as a natural part of community. Conflict is part of being in community. And the more we normalize that and get used to the fact that being in disagreement does not necessarily mean that you're being bullied or abused. It could, but it doesn't, much of the time it does not. It means that we're uncomfortable and we don't know how to deal with that discomfort. We don't know how to talk about it. So the more we help normalize that conflict is part of community and that sometimes conflict is bigger than we can handle on our own and we just need an extra hand. And we know that because even in middle school, they were like, buddies that are like, hey, dial it back 10%, and pulling people apart if they were starting to duke it out or something on the playground. So we know about intervening. We're mediating with each other all the time. We're conflict coaching all the time, but often without the skills or the knowledge of what will actually help the other person. So sometimes we're trying to rescue and tell people what to do instead of honoring their agency and offering the tools and information that lets people self-empower and take those steps. And just like you folks were saying, that when people have the information they need, so I would say in half of the cases that we saw over the course of 6 years of service, only half actually went to mediation. But of the ones that didn't go to mediation, they went to something called case development, where each person had a chance to sit down one-to-one with a couple of mediators, because they mediate in teams of 2. They're volunteers from the community, so they're neighbors helping neighbors, basically. And people have a chance to sit down, and those mediators listen to them and find out like what matters to you. How are you feeling about this whole situation? What are your needs underneath the whole story that you're telling? And what are some ways that you could kind of fill up your cup a bit around those needs, even little concrete ways, so that you have a little more spaciousness to enter into negotiation with the other person. And often people would walk away from that one session, 1 hour, and say, I've never been listened to like that before in my life. And I actually feel like I have clarity, and here are the things I'm going to do in relation to the situation. And actually, there are a lot of things where I'm feeling the same need, and I'm going to start taking care of that in other places. So they start not only meeting it for themselves, but they're like, hey, I can contribute to that. Like other people want support. So even separate from the issue of housing. So we can prepare each other and support each other in relation to conflict. So I already talked about that. That's town council from a long time ago because we launched in 2015. And I was doing this presentation for town councils and saying, look, you know, we can divert things. Are there town councilors in the room today? Any municipal workers? Anybody working? I mean, maybe don't want to put up your hand. Anybody working for the city? Anybody city workers in the building? I think we got a few city workers. And how about people, anybody working for elected offices that are maybe not city, or maybe you're related to police or victim services, any of those folks? And yeah, and so all of these folks, including our colleagues who are responding to the housing takeovers and One City and the Housing Resource Centre, all of these folks are doing really important work. But these are more crisis response roles, and we need stuff that people can get access to before it's a crisis. It's much more effective and efficient, and it helps people retain their housing and their relationships, which is really important. So it's this idea of empowerment and self-empowerment. It's not like we have a magic wand and we're like empowering people. It's that we're honoring the dignity that's already there, and supporting people to find vocabulary around their experience. I know people sometimes get sick of the term resilience, but I mean it not in terms of that people should have to bounce back all the time, but that we can actually increase our capacity as a community to kind of support each other so that we're all, you know, better able to bounce back with it without it being disproportionately some people constantly doing the bouncing back. So community mediation in Ontario is overseen by the Ontario Community Mediation Coalition, and it's a partnership that's there are sort of 3 or 4 really big shot agencies. So like Community Justice Initiatives in Kitchener-Waterloo probably has the most restorative approach to community mediation. It's all considered transformative mediation, not the kind of lawyer style of mediation that we talk about. Maybe you've seen the book Getting to Yes or something like that. Very powerful stuff, but it's interest-based and it's about material outcomes. Community mediation recognizes that conflict in community is fundamentally relational. And if people parachute in and help people solve a material problem and don't support people to be in dialogue with each other in a better way, those folks are in conflict again like a week later, and they don't have the tools to navigate that. So community mediation is about role modeling some of those tools. It's educational as people are experiencing it, so people are better equipped to deal with that conflict as it goes forward. You're going to have to, you know, you can't pick your neighbors. They're there, and so, you know, many of us can't pick our neighbors. Some people can't, but most people can't. And so community justice initiatives I really like because they take a much more restorative approach. That said, all the community mediation services in Ontario commit to a transformative and restorative model. Some of them are just a little bit more structured and linear, and some of them are a little bit more circular and responsive. And so community mediation was working quite closely with community justice initiatives and really benefiting from these bigger, better funded agencies supporting us around many things. And they, most of these agencies get funding from their cities because the cities know that it's a massive cost savings. And I'll tell you briefly about that in a minute. So where are we at? We're currently paused. We had funding for 1 year in 2016 under the, what was it called? It's like a community safe proceeds of crime grant. Are you giving me 5 minutes? Okay. I was very ambitious and thought I might do an activity with you, but I won't. We'll play again another day. So we're paused. We had that 1 year of funding, and then because we had launched and we had such great momentum, staff were like, yeah, we want to keep this going. And we had this awesome team of volunteers like, we want to keep this going. And so off the sides of our desks, really, for the last 6 years, we've kept something alive that we weren't really able to respond as fully as we wanted. So even now that we're paused and it's pulled from the website, we're still getting probably 4 requests a month for community mediation and referrals from municipal offices and the city. So that original partnership was between Peterborough Housing, John Howard Society, and Peterborough Police Services. But ideally, this would be a community-held program, so that the program itself is recognized as neutral by the people who participate. Our volunteers, we want them to come from the communities they serve. We want them to represent diverse ages and lived experiences, and they're all trained to the same high standard, which is actually recognized by the lawyer-governed Alternative Dispute Resolution Institute of Ontario. So people who want to be professional mediators who are going to be maybe certified through that body, our training is recognized highly enough that it's counted towards those professional development credentials. And the idea is that the volunteers are tended well, that we're not like just training people up and then exploiting them. Like, we want to work in a way that's sustainable. We want to work in a way that people who are participating can't tell who's giving and who's receiving, because we're supporting the team so well and they're benefiting so much from it themselves. And they practice in teams at 2. Without funding in the wider community, we still have funding to do this work in schools. So we've been working in schools with the exact same standard of training up community mediators. The first cohort was in 2016. Those kids have since graduated whatever post-secondary they were going to do, and some of them are working out in the world with those skills, and it's about 50 of them. It's really exciting to see. And another 3,000 kids in our area have received nonviolent communication training as a result of us hanging out in classrooms for 6-week stints. So the idea is that we're training people to be neutral but connected, right? So not neutral through distance, but neutral through shared connection, to hold confidentiality, to protect the voluntary nature of it, and to ensure that it's free and accessible. So basically, this kind of thing requires core funding, like any program, but in particular because we're serving folks in high distress often, who face complex challenges, we need to make sure that we have stable staff, that we're maintaining standards that people in the community can count on, and that the participants and the volunteers can count on, and that it's community-based, that it's not like one organization driving it, and that it's got referrals from a wide range in the community. So I feel the time ending. I'm going to hand out this little cheat sheet to folks, and you can sort of see a little bit more, and while that's going around, I'll just sort of sum up a little bit of kind of what happened over the last few years. And you can read it in more detail. But basically, when the police are called out, 2 officers typically have to go. And when they go, they're called out for a minimum, they bill out for a minimum of 4 hours. So each call out costs about $300. And so that's for the lowest ranking officer. So that price goes up as the officer's rank in the department goes up. And looking at the 2020 Peterborough Police Annual Report, about 2,000 non-police matters were logged related to landlord-tenant, neighbor disputes, noise complaints, and animal complaints. And many of those could have been on the first call diverted to community mediation. Instead, in Canada, Stats Canada tells us that the average police department, when they get those non-police calls, they're going out on minimum 7 times. So you can multiply that 300 by 7 off the top, and then ramp it up for the more expensive officers. So at its lowest cost, we're looking at, for that about 2,000 call-outs, we're looking at about $631,000 for non-police matters. So what would it look like for something like community mediation to respond to that? Well, for our program, we can, because we're leveraging volunteers, because we're building community relationships and connection that way, we're looking at about half of that cost. And this is very, very conservative estimate. We're probably saving numbers that are so high that it would be ridiculous for me to write them down. So Baltimore Police did their own research about their community mediation program in a city that has some of the highest interpersonal and gun violence in the United States per capita. And they found that for every community mediation, for every case that qualified for community mediation, for every one of those intakes, they reduced police callouts by 8.5 times. Like, the savings are massive, just so massive. So even if we had 1.5 full-time employees working in community mediation to corral volunteers, we would see something like a 1.5 reduction in that police cost. And I know that there are lots of hot feelings about policing and in all perspectives about it, and they're totally valid. When we're having this conversation, we have to look at the reality that policing exists as it exists. And so what can we negotiate in relation to what we're looking at right now to increase safety, increase housing stability? Well, that frees up police officers to deal with actual violent incidents. So that's huge. And people de-escalate, but that's not where the savings end. They end in terms of the administrative costs that are no longer happening because those calls are not going to City Hall anymore. They're not taking up time all over the place. And people are happier. People who've gone to mediation and then end up in a civil court are actually more likely to hold to the agreement that they get to in a civil court as well. So it's got long-standing impacts. And then, just so you know, as a skeleton program, we served over 4,319 people in Peterborough between 2016 and 2022, just scrambling to respond. And I think if we had dedicated staff and could leverage the partnerships that we so, appreciate in the community, that we could really see something incredible happening around that. So, yeah, I'll probably stop there. I will leave this with you. I think that one other thing that I want to mention is that in terms of this new research about the impacts on housing stability that Massachusetts state saw, is that something like 75% of the cases that went to mediation related to the risk of eviction. Something like 65% saw retained housing and creative solutions to ensure that people stayed more secure. So I think that's huge. The other thing that I think is just super exciting is that in Baltimore, the neighborhoods that were making active use of community mediation not only saw reduced police presence, they saw reduced domestic violence in those same neighborhoods. They saw reduced gun violence in those neighborhoods. I don't know what it means for housing takeovers, but would we see a reduction of that because people are actually more connected with each other? They're calling out for help when they need it. So I will stop there because I'm not even looking Sage in the eye anymore. And, time for questions. Yay! Thank you. Thoughts, questions, curiosities? Yeah.
I'm wondering about the calls that are made to police, like the nuisance calls, the noise calls. Is there an actual outcome from those? Like, I know that's kind of the first thing that people go to if they don't feel comfortable approaching their neighbor and their landlord. They call the police.
Yeah.
So what, it sounds like it's a real waste of resources, one, but do you know what the actual outcome of those calls are other than a report?
I think police do their best to try and mitigate that, but often without training for that purpose. And so it's like other situations, mental health calls and things like that, where police are coming out to do a thing that they don't actually have training or background experience in. And I think that can be really challenging for them. In many cases, what we've heard from participants is that the police call ramped up the conflict because the other person became so offended that they had been exposed and were now at risk of some scary repercussion from something that wasn't actually yet a criminal matter. I often think, I see your hand, I often think that if we were to think of a spectrum of social behavior, that right in the middle is kind of cold, like neutral, a little bit cool. And if somebody acted like that to us, like right now, we'd be like, are you okay? And if people get colder than that, we're like, hey, not cool. And if they get a little bit, like being kind of not so kind to each other, they get like escorted out of the bank. But what we're doing is somebody's like up there in that range, and we're going way down to the bottom end of that spectrum where criminal harm is, and we're like, let's get those guys in. Let's get those people in to solve this problem. And conflict between community happens everywhere, from the most distressing and traumatic stuff that's above criminal all the way up into really, contented relationships. And we're calling police all the way through that spectrum. And I think it's a poor use of their services, but it's also denying us as a community the opportunity to learn through conflict and find the strength that's on the other side of the resilience of working through tricky things together. There was a thought over here.
I was just going to help answer that.
Oh yeah, please answer.
So I work with Peterborough Police, and so I think that no, it doesn't solve anything, because police don't want to go to those calls, essentially. Like, they really don't. They hate those calls, and they often don't get there in a timely manner anyways, because they're at like a domestic assault, or they're at more relative policing issues, and so it takes them a long time to get to those. And then by the time they've escalated, and in that time, if mediation could have intervened, it would have been so much more valuable. Police love community mediation. Like, we love this program. We're probably one of the biggest referrals still to this day.
Yes.
Police are very, very, very sad that we don't have this anymore, and we're scrambling for funding as well all the time. We're digging to see, because we can't actually take I know the police budget is a whole thing, but we can't just take the municipal budget and decide that we're gonna create a mediation program.
The city has to decide.
Yeah, so I can't as much as we would love to be okay, let's do this, because I'm sure it would lower our incident rates. We just can't. And so we're scrambling for funding all the time to be how can we get this mediation program back up and running, because it's so valuable to police, to community. It really is.
We get calls back from people who participated 5 years ago, that are saying that made a huge difference. It just changed the trajectory of my housing circumstance because of it. Yeah, it's very exciting. Yeah.
This is more of a comment, I guess. I was thinking when you're talking about the cost savings,
yeah,
money pieces, right? And there's a big part of me that hates these kind of arguments.
I also hate it.
But then my brain is also going in a direction of a different kind of cost savings that maybe we can't even quantify, which is in terms of kind of community members' economic well-being.
Yes.
When we know that a house full of 4 roommates who are single people living together to save money, because it's the only way you're going to find housing in a capitalist market that serves no one, all are evicted in a way that could have potentially been prevented or prolonged. With mediation, are all evicted. None of them are going to find something more affordable than what they had.
No, and especially
if any of them find it at all,
especially
right?
If they're students, because then their chances of getting, or if they're young adults, whether they're students or not, if they're under 35, it's going to be hard, because
and we know that people are increasingly going to be living in kind of roommate type arrangements, congregate living kind of arrangements. We know that lots of people are in various kinds of couch surfing or hidden homelessness situations that can be very tense. That can result in housing, complete housing loss in all kinds of ways.
Yeah.
And this feels like, the kind of preventative intervention that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, it does. It makes so much sense. And not only does it make sense, but people like it. People, even if it doesn't work out, even if they don't come to an agreement, people are that was really helpful. That was really useful. Instead of having a finger wagged at them, and even stay away from each other, right? Yeah, and in this Massachusetts research, which I'll share the link if there's a way to share it, what they found was that there were all kinds of outcomes that didn't fall under written agreement that actually improved quality of life for the people who went through mediation with their landlord. So repairs happened that had been long untended. People who, it didn't fall into their count of people who weren't evicted because of the mediation, but it did fall into this sort of nebulous area where the landlord and the tenant came up with a creative solution to make sure that housing was retained. Somehow it might have been a work exchange, or like some maintenance support, or like who knows. But what happens is people get humanized, and it's no longer this thorn in my side or that faceless whatever. It's the human beings involved that start engaging with each other, and that disrupts everything. It disrupts and unsettles everything when we begin to re-engage in community. If I can just tell a very quick story to end that just occurs to me to tell you, so I'm trusting that. When we began in 2016, we still had a fairly robust one part-time person running the program, but that was lots at the time. And we'd just begun working at one of the high schools in town. So we were going into classrooms for 6 weeks, teaching compassionate nonviolent communication, feelings and needs language, how to represent yourself without attacking other people's character, how to listen when people say stuff you don't like and translate it and guess, like, are you needing respect? And how to have some empathy for yourself, right? Like when you're choked, so that you can kind of notice, oh, what am I needing now and how can I tend that? And have the backs of my friends around that kind of thing. So the kids were learning that kind of stuff. Out in the community, we had, adults calling us and referrals coming in from Peterborough Housing and police and so forth. And we had a call come in from a subsidized housing location where 2 households were in hot conflict. Like it was so intense that I think their housing for both households was precarious. 2 adults, 2 kids in both households. And one of the big challenges was that there was this incredible noise that was happening in the middle of the night, and it was waking up the other household through paper-thin walls. And it was just, the other people were like, the disrespect, and it was escalating. And so they called in community mediation, and folks sat down together. They didn't believe it was going to work, but they were like, yeah, we're willing, we'll give it a shot. And so both households sat down with our mediators, and we pulled out some feelings and needs cards because it's a really fast way to get people past the story and into what matters at the heart of things. And they're pulling out their needs, respect, rest, consideration, well-being, security starts coming up, other things start coming up. It turns out one household lost a job, a major job in the household, and that household was in incredible financial distress. The other household had been without work for some time, and somebody had just gotten night shift work and was coming home late at night and needed to decompress at the end of the day, but has a hearing problem and was turning on the TV so loud that it was like waking up everybody in the other household, and Granny was over there, and there was this intergenerational stuff going on. And as they were talking back and forth, the other one's like, oh yeah, we know that situation. Yeah, we've been through that. Oh, that's been real. I'm sorry that's going on for you. And people began to care about each other. They were never going to be best friends, but they were hearing their own story in the other people's story. And so they began to come up with solutions and ideas, and wouldn't you know, by the end of 2.5 hours, they were planning a barbecue for their whole like housing complex of maybe 8 or 10 people, because it turned out there were all these untended repairs that were going on, and all the tenants had kind of been discouraged from being in contact with each other. So now they were going to make sure those repairs were tended. They were going to organize and take care of that, because now they're in community. And their kids in both households were in my classrooms learning how to talk about feelings and needs. So those parents went home with new language to talk to their neighbors, but it was also new language to talk to their kids, and it was the language that mirrored what those kids were bringing home as well. So things changed, and we heard back from one of those families that it had a huge, huge impact in the quality of the relationships and the stress and tension that they had been experiencing routinely in their household. That, to me, is so exciting, that kind of wraparound care and support, where we can get beyond throwing life preservers out and start really building the kind of resilience and strength and mutual care and support that lifts us all up as a community.
Okay, I got. Sorry, go with Brittany MacMillan on housing and homelessness challenges survivors face.
Wonderful. Thank you. I'm gonna kind of like move around a bit. I'm wearing this fanny pack because my pants have ripped, so it's perfect timing, you know. I realized it, thank goodness, before I got up here, and everyone's like, "Oh my gosh." So if you see anything, just like give me a nod. So yes, hi, I'm Brittany MacMillan. I'm the executive director at CASAC, Kawartha Sexual Assault Centre. We are based in Peterborough, our head office, but we serve the 4 catchment areas, so Northumberland, Kawartha Lakes, and Haliburton counties. So you may be wondering, you know, why am I here talking about sexual violence? But the goal today is really to talk about the linkage between the housing crisis and survivors of gender-based or sexual violence. So the ways I'm going to do that are first by talking about just some general stats and facts about gender-based violence, risks survivors face when they are living with an abuser, and then the people who are homeless, the increased risk they may have to be targeted for certain gender-based violence. Oh gosh, it does it every time. Okay. So just some general information and facts. I'm going to kind of use different words interchangeably. So domestic violence, intimate partner violence, sexual violence or sexual assault, and then GBV, gender-based violence. So I just wanted to highlight those. Personally, I don't love intimate partner violence. I think that's, intimate should mean safe. So for me, that one's a little bit challenging. So I'll probably refer a little bit more to domestic violence throughout my presentation. And just so that folks know, throughout this, I'm going to be referring specifically to women. At CASAC, our definition of women includes our trans sisters. And the reason I'm doing that is because I would just start like throwing so many different stats and different facts out there, and I thought being able to focus on women specifically for the purpose of this presentation made a lot of sense. And as a survivor myself of both domestic violence and sexual violence, I felt like my kind of lived experience with that made a lot of sense for this piece. At CASAC, though, we do support all genders, so I don't want people to lose sight of that piece, thinking that we only serve women. So just some general facts. Only 6% of survivors of sexual violence report to police. So that means 94% of situations that happen aren't reported to police. That often is why it's really hard for us to gather specific stats if they're not being reported to police. But we understand why, right? So there's a lot of reasons someone may or may not report to police. One thing, that always seems to stand out with survivors of sexual violence is the fear of not being believed. Just wanted to highlight that sometimes people don't come forward because they're scared they won't be believed, or the person that they first disclosed to maybe didn't respond in a way that felt supported, so now how am I going to go to police? Also, telling our stories over and over again can be very re-traumatizing, and there's other, other pieces that we want to mention here as well around, the justice system in general, putting a lot of survivors on kind of display during trials, so people often won't report for those reasons. That being said, statistically from what we have, we think these stats are quite low, but 1 in 3 women will experience sexual violence at some point in their lifetime. 1 in 2 women will experience emotional, financial, or psychological abuse by a partner in their lifetime. And then 1 in 4 women will experience physical violence by their partner in their lifetime. So media-wise, we've really been taught since we were, this little, that a lot of crimes against women happen on the streets or happen when we're out and about or whatever, and we've been taught from a young age that we need to protect ourselves. That does happen. I don't want to deny that random attacks don't happen. However, as women, we are more likely to be assaulted within our own home by somebody that we know. So it's just important to think about those pieces, and when you think of the definition of domestic violence, it specifically has a part in there that says someone in my home. So I just wanted to bring that up because it is a bit of a myth when it comes to sexual violence specifically, that it often happens by somebody at random. Yes, it does. However, it is more likely to happen by somebody that we know. That's especially true for children who experience sexual violence. So, why am I here? Gender-based violence is one of the leading causes of homelessness and risk of homelessness among women and children. I know when we start talking about sexual violence, like violence, people are like, whoa. So, this is meant to be informative, but I don't want people to feel, super sad after this. So we will get to the part where, hope, I think I really appreciated the first panel where they talked about hope, so we will get to that part, I promise. Here are some realities for individuals. So if we're thinking about women specifically who are living with their abusers, there are a few reasons they might be living with their abuser. One, some survivors will stay with their abuser as the alternative is becoming homeless. Right now, the cost of living has made it super difficult for anybody to be independent. Women from all socioeconomic backgrounds are identifying challenges with finances right now. So if I'm living with my abusive partner and I can't make ends meet any other way, I might have to stay so that I don't end up homeless. Or the alternative is becoming homeless. I also want to talk a little bit about something that doesn't have a ton of research, but we're noticing it anecdotally through our work with the Peterborough Domestic Abuse Network and through other agencies who support gender-based violence. But the housing market challenges right now. So this is again looking at a socioeconomic background of folks that were maybe middle class or upper class, but that we're noticing right now a lot of people when they're through a divorce settlement needing to sell their home, but having to stay living, kind of cohabitating together until the home sells, so that they can split assets and move on, figure it out. But when you're waiting for your house to sell and you have to live with an abusive partner, there's tons of risks. And one thing that is happening in our community is the abuser often is forcing longer closures. So to keep control over their survivor or their victim, they might be denying showings. They might be damaging the home so that it's not market ready. They might not take offers that are probably decent offers but are declining offers, or extending closing dates so nobody gets paid out. So this again just shows the risks that sexual violence or gender-based violence has when you're having to live with your abuser and you have no other option. And we do know, we work quite closely with the YWCA and with the Yes Shelter, and we do know that often a lot of shelters are at capacity right now. So even if the alternative is to move into a shelter, there's often not space. Some other factors that happen or that women face when they're living with their abuser, risks or threats to our children. So whether that's our children with the person who we're living with who's our abuser, or their stepchildren, our stepchildren, whatever it might look like, quite often that's held over survivors' heads in the way of, well, if you leave me, I might hurt the kids. Or if they are hurting the kids as well as mom or stepmom or whatever, then you might stay in order to keep protecting them so that there's no risks of like shared custody, that type of thing. Risks and threats to our animals. So we're seeing this a lot as well, and we're going to get to that when I talk a little bit more about our rural community members. But same sort of thing, and many shelters won't accept animals. So, you know, if you leave, how are you gonna maintain this dog? I'm gonna hurt the dog if, those types of things. Financial and economic abuse. So this one we're seeing a lot of when it comes to cell phone providers. So if I share a cell phone provider with my abusive partner, he's now able to track where I go. He's able to track who I'm speaking to. If I've asked for help, I'm now at an increased risk of being hurt because I've asked for help. He can also imitate me. So he can get on my phone, pretend he's me, and start isolating my safe people, because that is what abusers do. So there's those pieces. Or if I have a credit card in my name, he might max it out. How do I then become independent without that? And then employment sabotage is a big one as well. So whether it's not allowing you to work, or harassing you so much while you're at work that you end up being let go because you're not fulfilling your duties, threatening you while you're at work, types of things like that. Again, making it more and more difficult for people who are in abusive relationships to become independent, to be able to be housed appropriately or safely. So this one just really, hits, I think, differently for a lot of people, but it's something that not a lot of people know when it comes to domestic violence or gender-based violence, but the most dangerous time for a woman who is being abused is when she has decided to leave. So whether that's that he has found out that she's leaving, or I get my apartment in a month, so we're dividing our assets. But that is the most dangerous time for a woman who's being abused. There's been tons and tons of cases. You can, Google it to see that there's been long history of domestic violence for people, and then all of a sudden she ends up murdered, or the kids do, and often it's during that time where she has decided to leave. So safety planning is super important at that point, and that is why we have wonderful agencies like the YWCA, CASAC, other places. However, there's not always 100% a perfect safety plan when a woman has decided to leave her abuser. I just want to highlight, because we're the 4 catchment areas, we're very predominant in Peterborough, like a lot of our local agencies based on our offices here, things like that. But we do serve our rural communities. And some of these risks for women when they live in rural communities are actually amplified. So we talked a little bit about, risks to or threats to our animals. Well, if we live on a farm and we have livestock, that risk might increase, right? Who's going to take care of the horses if I leave? What's he going to do to this if I'm no longer around? Family connections as well. So I live in a very small town in a rural area close by, and everybody knows my husband. I'm just his wife based in this community, but everyone knows my husband, right? So thinking about that for a lot of women who are being abused, how do they go to somebody for help when when somebody's perceived maybe a good guy, or they're got so many relatives within the community? So that actually makes it more and more difficult for people who are being abused to come out and say, I need some help. We also think about the distance to get help. So if your neighbor's 5 kilometers away, if something happens, they won't hear you scream. Things like I grew up in Peterborough, so we had close neighbors. You can see people come and go, and if someone hasn't come and gone in a while, you're like, where's Nancy? I haven't seen her in a while. You go check up on them. That might not often happen in rural communities. We're thinking about cell reception, so again, a privilege actually to have, especially right now with cost of living. Some people might not have access to a phone anymore, or if they do, it might be really spotty, or it could be pay as I go, things like that. So how can I call for help if something's going on? And then internet reception. And I wanted to talk a little bit about this because during COVID, when all of us had to to move to like virtual supports, the risk we put women who were being abused or anyone being abused by their partner was immense. Because if I access my services and they're suddenly saying, hey, I can only meet with you over Zoom, what happens if they're living with their abuser and they don't even know that they're involved with someone like KSAC? So again, that's why KSAC sort of and other places kept their doors open for the folks that was too dangerous to do anything virtually. You know, we don't even leave voicemails, and we hide who when we're calling new clients to make sure. So that piece really, I think, thinking about more rural communities as well is super amplified, and I'm also thinking about the disservice we've done in just being based very, very much in Peterborough. So we are using the county hubs through the city of Peterborough, things like that. We can meet clients where they live. However, if they walk into, you know, the town hall in their local community, somebody might see and might put two and two together. So we're still putting people at great risk if they're not able to kind of safely tell people that they're being abused. So now I just want to kind of shift gears a little bit. So that was, you know, the bulk of the risks that people might have in becoming unhoused. Or the alternative is staying and living with our abuser. I think a really important piece to highlight before we shift here is, like, in recent news, there's been quite a few very horrific cases of domestic violence. The one that I think hit close to home for everybody was the Sault Ste. Marie case, where 3 children were murdered by their biological father, along with their mother was murdered, which was an ongoing domestic violence. You know, police had been reported about this situation a lot, and then finally, unfortunately, it ended up being the murder of 3 or 4 people. And the response after was that Sault Ste. Marie declared intimate partner violence or domestic violence an epidemic in their community. So one thing I just really want to, like, shine light on is at KSAC, our goal is to become a place of prevention education. So we do provide prevention education. It is not funded by the government. We just do it. Sort of like what we were talking about earlier is all these off the side of our desk type stuff. But that is a crucial piece in actually ending gender-based violence. So we're typically the people that you come to after you've experienced sexual violence. And our vision one day is in hopes to just be a place of learning and to be a place of hope. However, you know, the city of Peterborough and county of the county have all declared intimate or gender-based violence an epidemic in our communities, which again gives us one step closer to, like, we need to identify that this is a problem, and now we need to figure out ways to prevent this from happening to more people. So now let's talk a little bit about people who are homeless, or unhoused, or couch surfing, whatever it might look like, are often targeted for things like sex trafficking. So Peterborough has the 2nd highest rate of sex trafficking in all of Canada. Like, what a lovely stat. So I want, though, to make sure people don't just think it happens to the people who are unhoused. This is a common situation that's happening to, again, all socioeconomical people. The average age of trafficking is around 11 to 13-year-olds who are housed. However, this could be amplified, or an easier target might be somebody who doesn't have housing, that they could be targeted quite quickly for sex trafficking. And sometimes there seems to be a willingness for it because they are promised housing. So, hey, I'll give you money, I'll give you this, I'll give you all these things, and then they end up in a position where they might not be able to get out. So that is one kind of important thing to highlight when it comes to sex trafficking. KSAC just renewed our human trafficking funding, everyone, like last week, so that's beautiful news. But we were about to be cut, our human trafficking response team at KSAC, 4 positions within the agency, until, we got a great email, but just letting people know that is a huge issue in our community. Another issue similar to what I was saying about sex trafficking survivors is they may move really quickly into a new relationship that we might not see the signs or the red flags that we're getting into an abusive relationship if we're looking from a survival perspective. So, okay, he's offered me a home. I need to survive. I need my kids to survive. Let's move in. And then you're in the same situation where you're having to decide, do you leave an abusive relationship or do you end up unhoused? And then another really important thing to remember is that childhood sexual abuse often leads to homelessness. And it contributes to the risk of re-victimization. So I don't know the exact stat here. I know we talk about it at KSAC all the time, but the amount of people who are re-victimized, especially with sexual violence, if they experience sexual violence as a child, is huge. So we're again putting children at risk of being re-assaulted or re-victimized if they've experienced childhood sexual abuse, and we're putting grown-ups, if they experience that as a child, at increased risk as well. And then we just want to, highlight that women who experience serious mental illnesses are also highly, I said vulnerable here, I should have said targeted, because, that is what's happening, is they're being targeted for sexual violence as well. Yes. So, how am I at with time?
Just a couple minutes.
Okay, I did great. So at KSAC, I just wanted to again kind of highlight some of the hope piece. So we, as difficult, and we talked a little bit about moral injury earlier, and we talked about frontline work being super difficult and trauma, and KSAC is made up, like a lot of our work is done through folks who are also survivors, so this ends up quite a traumatic kind of burden as well. However, it's a great little group of people. So I just wanted to highlight that if you have ever experienced sexual violence, or you know a friend or whatever that might be, that we are a support in your community, and you can give us a call. There's also a 24/7, they call it a crisis line, I think it's more of a support line. So there is that 24/7 support line that actually is run through the Durham Rape Crisis Centre, but it's available. We provide one-to-one counseling, variety of groups, and we also do a ton in public education on issues related to sexual violence, consent, and sex trafficking. So those are the pieces that, for me, when I was given the opportunity to work for KSAC, was a lot around their prevention education. I was so impressed by. Their male allyship training is brilliant. It's funded through the city. Thanks, Alex. And just general prevention education, so things around healthy relationships, how to talk to your kids about sexual violence, and things like that. So I just wanted to kind of end on that note, and then I've got our questions and my contact info in case people aren't comfortable asking questions in public. That's okay too, but you're welcome to reach out that way, but I'll open it up to questions. Okay. Yeah.
Me?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I just wanted to ask a question around public education, and if you do outreach around education in schools, and what that looks like. Is there also a component of internet education around that, particularly because I know that is a huge source of risk for young females? I have a 12-year-old daughter who looks like she's about 20, and every time she leaves the house, I'm like, oh my god, you're gonna get trafficked in Peterborough. It's a real fear. So, and I try to talk to her about that, but because it is so close to me, it might not be as neutralized as it probably should be. Yeah. So I'm just wondering what part of the public education actually targets the folks that are really, really vulnerable and at risk.
Yeah, for sure. So we have an agreement with the Kawartha Pine Ridge District School Board and Trillium. The Catholic Board won't let us in. I'll just say it out loud. Sorry, anyone that's with the Catholic Board. So the beauty of our partnerships with KPR specifically I'll highlight.
Good,
so we
she
do
goes
it.
to that school.
Yeah, so we do a ton of work. TAS is like one of our, like they're all a bunch of male allies running around that school right now. Kenner we do a ton of work with. We tend to get a lot right before prom season around like consent, healthy boundaries, things like that. And then we do have someone specifically dedicated to human trafficking. That's part of the grant that's been extended one more year. So she does a ton of work around internet safety, understanding that sometimes it might be the boyfriend in the classroom, not necessarily, you know, the ways the media has portrayed trafficking. So yes, all that needs to happen is the teacher needs to contact KSAC, or a parent could, and put a request in for us to come in, and they would work specifically with the class around what they want. We also did a huge stint with the Duro Dukes, Duro Minor Hockey Association, where we trained every little human from age 6 to 18 with different things, predominantly boys, in that association around their roles to end gender-based violence, and that was hugely successful. So anyone with kids in sports, I highly recommend. They had an in, my kid plays for the Dukes, so I was like, you guys need this. But it was really great, and my kid's still, like, he's 8 now, and he still talks about this consent game that they played, and like I wasn't in it, but he talks about that. You know, I'm raising 2 boys, so I feel it's in me to make little male allies. But yeah, certainly if they're in the school board or if they're in any sort of organization, that way, if they're, the beauty with the Dukes is a lot of those kids go to a Catholic school, so we were able to get into them anyway. Ruffled some feathers, but we did it. Yeah, question back there, and then I'll go to Alex. Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just curious, is there a reason why the trafficking numbers are so high here? Like, I just find that shocking.
There's a few suspected reasons. Some is the 401, like it's a quick way that way. I think a lot of it has to do as well with our unhousing and things like that. And yeah, like I know that they just did, my human trafficking person she's like, do you want me to come in case there's questions? I'm like, no, Jocelyn, I got this. And now I'm like, where's Jocelyn? But yeah, check out, if you even check in with KSAC, Jocelyn Enright is our prevention education coordinator for human trafficking. But a lot of it has to do with the kind of in between a bunch of bigger metropolitan areas as well.
I'm just wondering though whether the data, I mean, you don't know what you know and what you don't know sometimes, right? Mm-hmm. So is the data here better than in other places and therefore the numbers look higher than they really are, or is the data really truly accurate?
I think it's truly accurate.
Okay, just curious.
Yeah. Yes.
Just wondering, is there a difference, a discernible difference between the incidence of sexual violence in the general population and the homeless population? Is it more prevalent or is it the same?
I think because when you think about 1 in 3 and then 1 in 2 trans people will experience sexual violence. So 1 in 3 women, 1 in 2 trans people, 1 in 6 men. I think that it's not, I guess, discriminatory at that point with regards to unhoused or housed. I think that there's probably less ability to get resources for the folks who are unhoused, but also for thinking about this as the stigma piece. There's still huge stigma behind sexual violence, right? So the Me Too movement was kind of the first time people were able to say that out loud. I think especially if we're thinking about male survivors, there's still a lot of stigma for that population as well, and feeling like they can't come forward. So I wouldn't say, I think that it's so super common in the entire population. Yeah.
Because I often hear from people when I bring this up, like co-ed shelters, like where couples who are each other's natural support could actually be with each other. A lot of times the rationale is, oh, well, somebody gets sexually assaulted.
Right.
And we don't partition ourselves off when there's 1 in 3 of us doing this kind of thing.
Right.
People get sexually assaulted in single gender prisons.
Yeah.
That's really no.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Thank you for this, but I think I read on one of your slides that you're 16 and over.
Yeah.
I guess my question is why, when we have such a large population of 13, 14, 15 million women, and what resources they have.
Yeah, great question. Something we're advocating hugely to our governments right now. So we're 16 plus for counseling supports. Prevention education can be all ages. Human trafficking, sex trafficking, we've got a little bit of a window that we can do advocacy and accompaniment with those underage, but we can't do counseling. The biggest reason is we're not funded. Our mandate doesn't say that. So I recently had a chat about that, and the answer from the government was just, let's open your mandate to say under 16. And I'm like, with what money? Like, we can't just open a mandate and then 1 in 3 kids start freaking calling us. Like, so right now we're creating kind of partnerships with Kinark and PYS to see what opportunities they have for kids experience sexual violence. From my understanding, there's no one specifically doing that unless you can afford private, which again, the privileged get the service and the unprivileged don't. So our goal is to continue to advocate for it. We get calls, even when someone looks at our website, we get about 10 to 15 calls a month saying, hey, I saw on your website, 16 plus, but my child who's 12 was just raped. What can you do? And we're like, for fuck's sakes. So yeah, unfortunately, we'd love to. We need the resources to do it though. Yeah, Alex. Oh,
Sage is going to time check you, right?
Yeah, we have working groups starting very, very soon.
Okay.
Maybe one more
Sure.
question?
We'll do Alex's question, and then if anyone has any more, I'll like hang around with my pants wide open. Like that was because my pants are ripped, everyone. Sorry.
Oh, jeez. All right.
Okay. I like put my foot in my mouth right when I said it.
Cool. I actually needed that. Thank you. I mean, I guess I'm feeling sort of twisted up, and I think that the hard part about all these things we're discussing is that the elephant in the room is like the funding that is necessary for everything we're talking about, is not there, and then the systems of support that scaffold everything around there has just been like, it also are just like treading water, and so it's really frustrating to talk about this because the reality is we need like the things you're talking about are like the systemic nature of the issue, right? And so I'm interested in, so I'm feeling twisted up a little bit about that, and I'm wondering if do you have support for parents? Because I know that like for myself, when I was a little boy and when I needed help. Even the people that were safe to me, I felt too ashamed to be able to ask for it. Or like when I was in my doctor's office, or like my teacher, like internally, deep down, and at the tectonic level of what was happening with me, I needed help, but like I just couldn't ask for it. And I really identify with the fact that like a lot of the time receiving help creates more of an issue, right? Yeah. And I see my own daughters. Who they are is changing from the way that they're like in a very small way are being sort of abused in the system, right? And so like do you have resources for parents to be able to like navigate help within our households about connecting with our kids about what they're experiencing?
Yeah, for sure. And thank you for sharing. I think that's like hugely important, and as a mom as well, and I think a lot about that. So one thing that they are starting soon, and it hasn't really been released, so probably I'll get in trouble by the clinical supervisor. She'll be like, why'd you say it? But we are going to start a therapeutic group for parents whose kids have experienced sexual violence to give them some tools on how to process that and how to talk to your kids and how to support your kids without becoming a counselor, because that's unfair to the parent. And also with the prevention education team, we're going to do kind of big segues on like how to talk to your kids about sex, how to talk to your kids about safety, how to, those pieces. So yes, there certainly is. And we also work with people who have experienced historical sexual violence. So often we're seeing that like parents come in to say, I experienced this at some point in my life, and now I need to figure out how to support my kid. So that also can be done in one-to-one sessions as well. So great question, and something, again, prevention education isn't part of our core funding model, but we've just really prioritized it because we're like, that's what the community needs. So yes, thank you. But I'll let Sage is gonna, yeah, I've stopped making eye contact too. But thank you all. Please reach out if you'd like to.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Research for Social Change Lab podcast. To stay up to date with our latest episodes, be sure to follow us on Apple Music, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. For more information on the Research for Social Change Lab's activities, including past, present, and future projects, visit socialchangelab.ca.